I'm so glad to be talking to you. And I feel like I should do a kind of disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast to say that we are really old, really deep, like dear friends. And so I was kind of feeling like, sometimes when you do a recorded interview with somebody who you know so well and admire so deeply on so many facets, it can come off like a series of inside jokes. And so we'll try not to do that. But also, I'm so grateful for all of that, for all of the ways that I know you and all of the ways that I've seen your work evolve and mutate.
Yeah, it's like super, super mutual. I feel like we've, like I just feel like we've both grown into ourselves. Like we also like, because of the length of the friendship, it's also you get a sense of transformation, about the other person. Like it's not just like, where are we at now? It's like I can see the Seamas behind this Seama as well. And it's such a gift. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's such a rare thing to allow yourself to be, to be seen all the way back. And of course, your new book, Fire is Not a Country, it's your most extraordinary work to date, which is saying something, because every work of yours that I open, I'm like, oh shit, this is another level. But I think, knowing you personally, and, when I met you, you were writing on the margins. Before that, you were literally, right? You came to poetry, writing in the margins of the newspaper, wherever you could find the paper, the place to write.
Yeah.
On the margins of your life, in the literal margins, as a single teenage mom, and making space for it, and then working like really hard jobs. And then now it seems like writing is moved to the center. The spotlight is on the writing for you professionally. And that's extraordinary to see. Talk about that. What's that?
There's like multiple things I feel like that's really special about our relationship. The fact that we're both moms, and like we were both young moms, and I think reproductive labor is such a structuring condition for like the rest of anything else we do. And I think folks who don't necessarily carry that responsibility, like it's hard to translate sometimes, like how much it affects our artistic practices, our artistic orientations, because it's very physical work. Like it's like emotional, it's intellectual, as they grow up, it probably grows a little bit more like up here, like we have to coach more than like breastfeed, obviously.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, it's very like your body, like your literal body, which is where language resides, belongs to other people. Right. And like, what does that mean for like the way that you think, the way what happens when like love has to be kind of the organizing principle for like your life and therefore your thought. So I think that's like something I feel like very lucky to be able to have had the space to kind of work through all of these years with you, and I think the work of mothering, whether you are like a literal, like and I'm talking about mothering as like a practice that anyone can hold. So it's not like gender specific, right? But like the kind of like responsibility that entails. I think it sometimes has demanded that I evacuate myself, because you're prioritizing other people. and their needs. And I think there's like a way of like thinking about this in a really like liberal feminist way, like that's super oppressive, like we can't be our own monsters and like whatever. But I actually think that there is a really generative aspect of that. Is like we have to exist with an other that is inside us and also external to us. And I feel like the work of like moving, I think for years what I was doing also was like my writing was it was like a quarantine. It was like where I quarantined like the pains and the suffering and the trauma that I carried, you know, from the past, that I inherited from the past, that I inherited from my own life, in order to prevent them from touching my child.
Right.
Does that make sense? It's like,
100%.
and it was, that's right. And it's so it was like a place where I could work through that stuff and like, and transform it. And the two kind of like creating and caring, I feel like they are very, very deeply imbricated for me. So like, I feel like as Paul has grown, there was also this like invitation for me to make the quarantine less porous, if that makes sense, for it to like be able to like, so it's like, it's not a quarantine anymore. It becomes like, I don't know, like a courtyard, like in the middle. Yes. I really feel like the last few years have been, like me figuring out how to kind of like create boundaries in my life, because I just feel like I have always worked. It's like, you know, since like I've worked since I was 15. And I think there's something about, and like work for me is like not, I think partly because like I had the experience of like motherhood, like since I was really young. And then I also was an organizer who was like unpaid for years, like on top of my regular job. And then like writing itself, right? Obviously, like you ain't getting paid when you're writing, like you try to cash it after, you know,
Right.
But like the work itself and like whatever we get, it's like it's often very, very disproportionate to like the amount of labor that goes into it. And I think that's all, that's like really created a unique relationship for me with like work and labor, because for me this is not the thing. In capitalism, it's like work is like how you survive. And like me, work is how I live. And like I think that distinction is like important, because I don't feel like oppressed by my work. I'm like, I feel like work is just the process by which I engage with the world. Like it's just, I just call it work. Do you know what I mean? But we could call it like Avatar. We could call it anything, but it's like a mode of engagement with the work, that with the world, that like tries to bring attention and like rigor and empathy. And I think because of that, it is difficult to kind of like draw fences, because I feel like there's just like different shades of work, you know, and I try to arrive to them in a good way. So I feel like the fences are like between different types of work, if that makes sense, rather than, for example, like there's the work of, you know, what does it mean to show up for my friends for like a late night phone call, you know? Like I feel like it's as important for me to like be ready to show up in that space, and not for reasons of like self-improvement or like, you know what I mean, not for reasons like capitalizing on like, but it's like we show up there because I feel like the work of attending to each other, I'm like, that is work. It's like it requires skill to like attend to each other, to like be with sometimes like someone else's pain. You know what I mean? And again, to just like hold it. So I feel, or someone else's joy, and be able to like really hold that with them. And then there's like the writing work. There's like work that I do for, maybe this sounds bad, which is I feel like there's like work that I'm like, okay, this is intentional fun because I'm gonna like watch films that I really like, or feel like I'm going to get inspired by, or like learn from, or like read. But I do want to make that distinction because it's not a means to an end. I feel like it's just the way I live. It's just the way that I inhabit this like duration of time that we call life, is to like try to meet as many different parts of the world with intention as I can. And like that to me is what I call work. Is that making sense?
It makes total sense. It's so beautiful. And I think my question came, from this idea of work, or the work of poetry, or the work of writing and engaging with the world being deeply, deeply draining at its, like you leave it and you're like, and I know that like for me, the fence is often like I have dinner plans. So I know like this shit's gonna end. I'm gonna get out of here, And it seems that like I love that this porousness of like, no, but the dinner plans are the work too. And and the like all of these other the bad TV is like, no, this is now we're shutting off my brain. That's what I'm gonna do. And I love that framing so much. Yeah, thank you for
Where
that.
it's not, I don't know, I guess like I think there's like a way, of course, like I'm also like hyper aware that like capitalism just wants us to work all the time. But I just don't think that capitalism gets to decide my vocabulary or like my definition for like what something means to me. The fact that that is what capitalism wants, and like it has a very particular imagination of what work is, which is like you extract. And now all of us are like extracting from ourselves to like work for free for like Instagram. I mean, real talk, right? Especially as artists, it's just like, it's like the silent job description. It's like produce content for Instagram that has nothing to do with what you're doing. But I think the reality is like, I think for me, there's a different tradition of work that I like relate to, if that makes sense. It's like I am thinking about there is, if you consider sort of like America is built on like centuries of unpaid labor because it was built on a foundation of slavery. And so I think there's a lot that I have learned from sort of Black feminist theorists and approaches about what it means to, like, what do you do when work is extracted from you like that? And it is under pain of death, and like violence and displacement and all of these things. And it's like, there's a need to then re-articulate this thing that your body is made to do for you, for yourself, even when the conditions are completely against you self-determining what work means. There's a long tradition of like oppressed peoples who have figured out how to do it and then created art out of it, and then created like these modes of like alternative ways of being with each other and taking care of each other. That we're look at the discourse on abolition today. Like it's just like it's carried forward across time. This other kind of parallel, this like the underworld of work as American capitalism would have us imagine it.
Right.
There's like a different kind of work. Like that's why, when we were growing up, it's like that's like the struggle is real. But like, like you're talking about you're not just talking about the struggle to make money. Like you're talking about the struggle to be a person. And so I think that's what like I relate to. It's just like the things that I do to try to be a person. I'm like, it takes work.
Yeah. In Fire is Not a Country, there are these interludes that are like plays, right? They're like little scenes. And And this one where this woman cannot find her own image, cannot see her own reflection. Okay, so for those of you who have not yet read Fire is Not a Country, please order it from our bookshop. We enter a scene where a woman is not seeing herself in the reflection and is on the phone with somebody who's like, it'll be okay, go outside, it's a beautiful day. Can we just talk about, like, where did that come from? A dream? Like what?
It's a really good question. I don't know where it came from. I honestly, I don't know where the things came from. I think they were like, it was like there were scenes in my head. I think I'm a really visual sort of processor. So I often like, I have images before I have words. And like a lot, sometimes like they are, sometimes they're like memory based, and then like often they're also just like fantastical. So I think with this, it was interesting with this, like with this interlude, I'm really glad you asked about it. Aracelis actually performed, she was like the woman who like couldn't see herself when we did the virtual launch, and she was so amazing. But I had to think through the implications, like, because it didn't arrive as like a premise, like what if everybody disappeared? Like I just had this like image of a woman who like literally couldn't see her own body. And I think it at some point, and I wrote this kind of like I wrote this in late 2019, like after I graduated, like the first draft of it anyway, after I graduated from my MFA, and I was like back in organizing again full time. And I think there was this contrast where I felt like, okay, I feel like I'm bombarded all the time by like the images of like bodies, because I go on an Instagram, there's like, and the way the algorithm works, it's just like it bombards you with like bodies. And obviously like I'm organizing, we're paying attention to kind of like the fates of different bodies like all of the time.
Right.
And I think that it was like sitting with this tension in my life where I felt invisible. You know what I mean? Like literally invisible. And it didn't mean like not powerful. It didn't mean like not having agency. It didn't mean like not having choices. It just meant that like I felt like I was completely like I had disappeared in a way from like my own life. And I was thinking about just like how many people must have experienced like this reality, as like, not just like as, as immigrants, but also like as like women, as like, we don't see reflections of ourselves. And like, it's funny because, in the screenplay, it's written like this happened like a pandemic, right? Whereas like suddenly like everybody in the world like sort of disappeared. And this was before the actual pandemic happened. And then when the pandemic sort of like arrived, how many of us have really seen the people who like lost their lives as a result of COVID? How many of us have actually like really, I'm not talking about like people in our personal lives. Like like my grandma, for example, like she was affected with COVID. Many people in my family, like especially in Indonesia, were like affected by COVID. And like, there's like a seeing there that is like as a result of proximity, but it's not because of a capacity to see. Does that make sense? Because I feel like we drown ourselves and like we get drowned by like information and by headlines and by like especially in the last 4 years, like with all of the protests that were taking place under Trump, like a crowdness, like a manyness of like bodies that also sort of like made what that also kind of like erase the singularity of each person, and like it's like we disappear because there's so many of us, and all of us are like in the same boat, and then we all want to speak in collective terms, and like, and that there's something in that was like actually interrupting our ability to see each other.
I read a line yesterday, I just finished this novel called The Song of Achilles, but there's a line in it where she says, the way a man who lives near a waterfall ceases to hear it because of its constantness.
Yeah.
Right. And there's something there about grief, about this, like, just like so much. You can't hear an individual drop of water. You can't parse through that thing. And then also we don't want to. Like,
Yeah.
let's not play. We don't want to. Right. We're just like, but this moment where the voice on the PA says, it's a good investment if you ask me to have a raccoon. Pets are the new faces of social media. They're pretty indispensable now for most human to human interactions. And yeah. Yeah.
Like, I just think that the need to and like, I think people talk also like, because we are, like, our society has grown so increasingly like narcissistic. Everyone is like, I need to feel seen, but I think that there's like the flip side of that is like, I need to see. Like, I need to be able to like see other people, like the desire, and we talk less about that part, but it's like the need to see and the need to be seen. They're actually like, you cannot have one without the other. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and I think the need for it is so primal for human beings. I really do think it's universal. That I think I'm like, if we were to disappear and not be able to see each other, which already is a metaphor for like, that's what surrealism or magical realism often does, right? It's just we literalize like a feeling. Like, okay, I feel invisible. Okay, so what happens if I actually make myself invisible, right? And that's what racism does. That's what patriarchy does. Like, you can like be married to somebody and like live with them for years and like never see each other, because patriarchy, what you see is patriarchy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what you see is like what the system needs you and wants you to see. It's not like you're not seeing each other. And I think that the need to see and to be seen is so primal that I'm like, if the situation were literalized and we like did dematerialize on some level and like can't see each other anymore, we would find a way to have a medium by which to see each other. So like, I mean, the obvious thing for me in this situation was like pets. We're already doing that. Like, look at the cat videos.
Yeah. Or honestly, like, is my avatar on Instagram or on social media not a pet version of me? Like, right? Like,
right. Exactly.
As a puppy, right? Like, I'm cute and I'm whatever.
And think about like the how we present ourselves. Like, look, I'm so cute. I'm so harmless. I'm so nice. And I'm like, these are like pet fucking qualities.
Right.
It's like in real life, I'm like, well, I can be pretty conflictual. Like, I'm not pleasant all the time. But like that, it's like, I feel like we all have like doggy versions of ourselves like out there in the world. It's a puppy version of me.
And it's this thing that we put in place of like to fill that need, like you're saying, of seeing and being seen, but that has maybe less risk attached to it.
Well, I think it's sad because we don't actually then see, right? Because you are seeing the puppy version of somebody.
I think too, there's something about what you said earlier about productivity and content generation. Yeah, I would be super tempted to monetize my baby if I had a baby. I'm not having any more babies, but if I did in this moment, there's like an expectation, right?
So this is obviously well before, the age of social media. but there are like these albums and albums of me being dressed up. And I sometimes think about like the fact that like how much being produced that way, you know, has like the way that it still lives in me.
We were being produced because I too had many mock weddings.
Me
I was a
too.
bride all the time dressed up as a bride. Yeah, but then to have money attached to it, like they
Yeah,
just did it for fun.
right.
But also like your children are your wealth, and the way that like any of the ways in which I deviated from what was expected of a good Bangladeshi girl
Yeah.
was like a real insult to like the family's standing, reputation, wealth, right?
Yeah. So much of like Fire Is Not a Country is about like working through being a dishonorable daughter. And I think the challenge was like, how do I do this in a way that doesn't make my, and you know, because like when we write poems, when we write, you're an essayist, it's like there is a way in which part of the process and part of the reward of writing it is that we become protagonists of those moments in our lives where actually our protagonism was what was being taken away.
Right.
And like our revisiting it and our writing it for the purposes that we need in our lives at this time, I'm like, that's where there's like this, that's where we get to recover the protagonism.
Right.
And, you know, the protagonist is the hero of the story. And then everybody else like ends up the bad guy. So I think that, but like we have a different, it's not so simple for us, right? As like immigrant writers and immigrant kids, it's like we also have the responsibility to protect our parents. And not to make them out to be the bad guy, and also not to make them out to be like the victims of like America or whatever, because they're so much more complicated than that. And like that is what that's what America wants. America loves immigrants being victims because then they get to feel good. They get to be reminded of their power, right? It's like, oh my God, you're suffering so much. And like, I am such a good person for being able to feel bad about your suffering. It's like, there's like that end of the stick, or like the opposite end where it's just like, you're a danger and you're a threat. And like, for me to feel good again, you must be entirely expelled or eliminated.
Right.
But neither of those options are humanizing. And I think one of the difficulties as like an immigrant writer, if you are talking about, you know, family, it's like, how do we have to balance like these competing priorities where it's like, okay, a part of this, like I am the writer, I am the protagonist. I think that's a radically different articulation of what protagonism could mean versus like the American version, you know, where like the cowboy rides into like the sunset and like kills all the villains and all his enemies and emerges triumphant. A lot of this book is about defeat. And it's a lot about like not being able to win, you know, and not being able to overcome. And I actually think that there's I'm like at a point in my life right now where I'm like where I'm recognizing the power of defeat. You know what I mean? Because inside of that, there is like a possibility to coexist, to continue coexisting with like some of the people who have harmed me the most, but who I also love the most. Does that make sense? And that requires being able to be defeated.
Yeah. To let the story not wrap up neatly.
That's right. With like, I am like triumph, you know.
Right. And to let the villains be more than villains, to let all of these things coexist. I've been thinking a lot about this quote from John O'Donohue. And he said, and I'm gonna paraphrase it a little bit, but he said there's a difference between identity and biography. And I'm like fucked up by it, right? Because I'm thinking about, yeah, we write these stories, right? We write these biographies and we rewrite them, and we write them from different angles about ourselves, about our mothers and fathers and grandparents and ancestors. And depending on what the mood is, we might make an ancestor really great, but we're really, for the most part, tending towards being concerned with the biography, what happened often to them, right?
Yeah.
Which is quite a bit different from who they were, and quite a bit different from who we are. So you and I can say all of these things that we have, like these biographical things that are in common, being, mothers very, very early to sons, who are similar in their ways too, all of these things. But then there's something else that is like the real flame of who we are. That's the thing that we're trying to see.
Yeah.
When we talk about seeing, that is beyond biography, that is beyond the Instagram avatar, that requires a longer look.
So good. That just gave me chills. And, I think about like the ways in which this tension between identity and biography is like, it's so endemic to the immigrant experience, like doctors who come here and then work in factories. Okay, let's just use that example. Are you a doctor? Or are you a factory worker? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, when I think about my father, who he was a dentist, and then he did end up working in a textile factory. The fact that he was not able to practice anymore for like 7 years, like before he died, like it didn't change the fact that like that's how he saw himself. Like that's the self that he wanted to be, was like the dentist part, right? The husband part. And I think that this is really important, because like that tension, between who we have to become, or like what we have to do under the pressures of like late American capitalism, versus like who we truly are. I've been like revisiting Hamlet. There's this line, it's early in the play, and it's like when he was so his mom was criticizing him for wearing mourning clothes at like her wedding. And he's saying like, these are just, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, these are just the trappings of grief. The tears, like the black clothes, like these are just the trappings for grief. And he's speaking about grief here, but like I think Shakespeare is brilliant in that he doesn't say this in the line. He says, I have that within which passeth show. And he doesn't say, I have grief within that passeth show. He says, I have that within that passeth show. And that like that's a poet's decision, to like, with lexical choice, to like open up the situation, to open up the monologue, to touch like everything else, because that could be anything. And maybe like that's what identity is. It's like the difference between the thing that you cannot show and you're moving towards all the time, and then the trappings. And the trappings might be the biography, like the things that happen to you.
Right.